Boom. We are live. We're going to be taking a look at Link for starters because there's a very kind of important thing that happened that will help us, again, create a better thesis around some of the things we're looking for in supply and demand characteristics for those of you that are studying. So let's just dive in and take a look at Link to start off with, and then we'll go over Bitcoin and Ethereum and a few other thoughts that we see just in general, I think, about the entire market sentiment. So we had been looking at Link yesterday and last night. Something rather interesting happened. Now, the reason it was interesting had to do with the volume supply that came in. And as you can see here, you had a huge amounts of supply come in, very little drop, all of it absorbed, huge amounts of supply, all of it was absorbed. And then the demand characteristics started to pick up again as well. So here we see that is in the color purple down at the bottom here. So as this supply character changed, I started to pick up a few more Link around $7.90 last night, or around 7.9, what is this, 79,000 Satoshis? Yeah, boom, around 7, pretty close with that $10,000 price, around here. Now, I think we're probably going to go to the top of this channel. Now, part of the discrepancy here is, do we go to the top of the channel, and then this becomes our primary support and our selling climax with an automatic rally, and then create a new accumulation range? It's kind of what I'm thinking. So I decided to take a short-term trade here. I didn't buy a ton of them, just enough. I do think Link actually anywhere between $8 and $2 is probably a good balancing range. Although, as you can see, if we look back here further, there's reason to believe it could come down as low as 2. Although what we're looking for right now is actually not a long-term projection. It's much more this intermediate time frame. I think that's helpful because right now, again at the bottom, this volume and supply absorption, or what some call stopping action, took place and then it turned around. So these can be very lucrative temporary trades in markets. And what I wanted to go over kind of as a side point was so I like FTX. Shout out to Sam creating these different derivatives, like what he's called the DeFi perp, which is the DeFi perpetual swap. So it's a basket of DeFi tokens, up 11.8% today, actually leading the market, right? So over top of Bitcoin and Ethereum is things like Link, right? So I've started to rewrite some of my thesis about what I'm going to be interested in accumulating for the long term, and it's heavily geared towards DeFi. Even though it's early on in the sector, I'm going to use Chainlink as our leader for that because it helps in some of the creation of these AMMs, etc. And as I'm learning more, I'm understanding the value proposition more effectively. Just in general, this whole ecosystem is such an interesting sector to begin with. So what we're looking for right now is alongside our study in the macro, which is the technological innovations that are taking place. It's to focus on the more intermediate volume characteristics and where money is moving, because I think that really completes the thesis now. We can monitor supply and demand characteristics and long accumulation periods for things that will be ultimately valuable to those who have done the due diligence, and we can double down and be ahead of the curve because the DeFi sector is still generally totally unknown. I don't even think most of the people, I don't even know what it is yet necessarily. Like, I can kind of make some assumptions, right? But that's about it. So I think even from those assumptions that I've been able to make, this sector is going to increase in value. I think it's as big as Bitcoin. I actually believe as well that the growth of Bitcoin the next little while will largely come from the internal growth of this sector because of its ability to create more value for its participants. I think that was succinct enough. So when I'm seeing this high amount of energy into Link here, which could be a quick 50% bounce before an ultimate selling climax into October, November, I'm going to be looking at the rest of the DeFi sector more frequently to look for more stronger accumulation ranges now that some of the hype is dying out and changing. Because in the sector right now, you go and you look at things like Wi-Fi, we had Wi-Fi on the desk when it was only a few grand, and I didn't look at it because I just was overwhelmed in my studies. But now that we've got more time and the Arcane Bear is scaled, we've had a little bit more time to make an assumption and thesis around what we're witnessing by using enough relevant data, that the DeFi sector is obviously, at least in my opinion, something that one should keep an eye on for this type of black swan nature. So we could actually be seeing a reaccumulation period take place probably somewhere October, November. And that's why I'm going to be interested in taking positions in something like Balancer, these liquidity pools, or synthetics, what they're building, because the hype cycle has gone away. We've seen a major buying climax, and we're going to come down into an accumulation area if there is to have legs in this sector, which I believe there is. Ultimately, you can see the performance of them 13%, 11%, 10% between Wi-Fi, Balancer, and synthetics. There are others in that mix too. Fetch obviously up at 11%, but look all the way back down to its regression line. So there's a few things in our thesis that are important here when we're using, because again, for those of you that were joined the Bear Den early enough to have been a part of this one, we entered Fetch in around April, May. So we got almost a 600% gain out of it, and I only took around 30 to 40% of my profits here. So I've sadly dragged the rest down, but that's okay. I'm still largely in profit, right? Because was a long play for me. I entered into the spring thinking that was a good idea, but no, you should actually wait till here. This is a much better idea. And even more importantly is to understand now that I've been through a cycle here, liquidate like 70 to 90% of the position up here, because these backup phases can be brutally annoying, right? I'm like, oh God, I hung on to such a big position right here. That's okay. Still ultimately a very successful trade. We had something very similar with one in seller too. So what I want to pinpoint and highlight is that now the DeFi sector is going to go into an area of accumulation. I'm going to be keeping more of an eye on it because it's fallen into both my categories of observation now, which is money, volume, and supply and demand characteristics alongside technological innovation, something that was becoming a bit more clear as we add people into the Arcane Bear family that can help me really dissect what's going on here. So we're working on how we can provide that in content. Like I said, the DeFi for Dummies. Later today, we've got a podcast I did with Matthew Feinstone of Loopring, and we're just going to start asking questions because I don't know anything in this sector, so we can pretty much have every company on. So we'll kind of offer some new suites of ideas. Today will be Tio's Token Tangent Thursday or something like that. We're not going to call that, but so in the email, if you're in the free email group for now, it's just for the free one for now. The private members get something else, but this free one is just a short 2 or 3 page synopsis of what Loopring is alongside the podcast, so we can try to help build out a more consistent frequency of the podcast and the way we scale that, so I can kind of go along and learn more. And we'll give a lot more opportunity for me to learn more because we're building some cool stuff out. So keep your eyes on that. Lastly, I wanted to look at Ethereum and Bitcoin. Now that I've got that DeFi, my excitement for the DeFi sector, kind of finding a bearing and the hype is over. Very happy to see that some of the hype is ending. So we might see that we get a wave 4 in Chainlink here as well sooner, maybe rather than later, not a full large scale accumulation. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on that story. But I think it's going to help lead the way for some of our other more fundamental volume supply characteristics and then tech as well. It's going to bode really, really well for us. So in looking at Ethereum as one of our market leaders here, back into the charts we had written up the other day, we actually found ultimately support in this new range, and that could be ultimately a very positive thing. Now, again, we did see that big gap that could be taken out in the DeFi sector, another like 30 to 40% down before you find a real selling climax. I think that would affect Ethereum's price, obviously, too, which again could bring us to around $250 pretty easily. But it's nice to see that we did find some more support on this trend line, because we had originally hoped we would build in through this and then have a breakout and see a very, very beautiful backup accumulation, very similar to what we saw with things like Fetch and sorry, not Fetch. Fetch had an explosion in its SOS, but after the backup, like Tron had a really beautiful after the backup breakout. Waves did as well. OMG, there are a few that characteristically caught in a new area of support and then took off. And I feel that because Ethereum is such a strong player and because the DeFi sector kind of rides on its rails, this is the area to keep an eye on here, specifically around $320. If it breaks down, okay, no big deal. 256, we'll get a longer backup phase. I'm not too worried about it. And again, even more importantly, keeping an eye on the DeFi sector because of what it can do for Bitcoin, I think is going to be ultimately a winning strategy in terms of macro and fundamentals, or I guess technical and fundamentals, if you want to call it that. Because the only fundamental here that I was having a hard time grasping is the technical one, not like technical analysis, but like the literal tech side of these things. So I want to thank you guys for being so supportive. We are just working on some more PDFs for the private group as well, so those will be hitting your inboxes shortly. I'm very excited to see how all the growth is going. We're helping fit some new spaces in to build that podcast, more of that research into the DeFi stuff, because it's too much for me to do by myself. And we want to be able to provide as much value to you guys for what we're doing. So we scale out in a few different footsteps over the next few months. And yeah, really excited. I think a lot of people, at least now that have been listening to the channel, recognize that we use clickbait titles to get a lot of new people's attention. And then we really try to help ingrain the idea that this is always a multi-month, multi-year cycle thing you have to be interested in to be successful here. So be patient. That will ultimately be one of the most rewarding things for you in this ecosystem. So thank you guys for joining us. Smash like, leave your thoughts, your comments, your questions down below, and we will have the kind of wild and avant-garde podcast with Matthew Finestone. I had a really good time chatting with him, so keep your eye on that one as well as we produce some of these more podcasts where hopefully I can learn something and maybe share something you guys didn't know either along the way. So let's deal with the Arcane Bear. I'm going to give you the outro logo because everyone likes a bear.